began with a whisper, one that shivered its way through the marble halls of Congress, through the hushed corridors behind closed doors, until it reached Jasmine Crockett's ears at an ungodly hour. The words landed on her like a thunderclap. Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul who bent the future to his will, had confessed something so staggering that the entire nation would tremble when the truth came out. Jasmine hadn't slept. The glow of her phone screen painting her determined face in pale light, she stared at the headline forwarded by an anonymous source inside the Capitol. Elon Musk's shocking confession. Jasmine Crockett exposes the truth. Her heart thundered against her ribs. At first, she assumed it was a prank, some manipulated audio clip or a doctored video planted by political operatives trying to derail her next big legislative push on the House floor. But then she listened. 1-2 seconds of static crackled. Then his voice, unmistakable even in its hushed tone, admitted that he had, under duress, funded a clandestine operation aimed at influencing an upcoming Supreme Court decision. She played the clip again, slower this time. It was him, soft and measured, speaking with the gravity of someone revealing his own guilt. I provided resources, though I knew the consequences, but they threatened to expose my private dealings. I had no choice. Could this be real? Could Elon Musk, a figure who cultivated an image of unassailable autonomy, have bent the arm of the judiciary? Had he toyed with the very bedrock of American democracy? And if so, who had the leverage to force his confession? Jasmine's mind raced faster than the news ticker scrolling across the screen. She pressed her palm against her eyes, wished sleep would claim her, but she knew that would be a luxury she couldn't afford. By dawn, she had a decision to make: expose the tape and watch her world explode, or bury it and protect herself from the storm. She chose exposure. When the first rays of morning sunlight cut across her Washington, D.C. apartment, Jasmine Crockett was already behind her laptop, drafting a statement that would send shockwaves through the Capitol. She employed every shred of her legal training to frame her words carefully, weaving in hints of what she knew without disclosing everything. She called an emergency press conference, inviting every major news outlet, even those she'd sparred with in the past. There was no turning back. In the audience that afternoon, reporters buzzed with anticipation, cameras panned, and Supreme Court clerks lingered outside, murmuring like ghosts in the outer chambers. They knew her reputation. Unflinching, fearless, the Congresswoman from Texas who never backed down from a fight. Jasmine stepped up to the podium, her black blazer crisp, her posture immaculate. She inhaled, summoning the calm she projected to her constituents back home. At that moment, the world paused. Every camera lens zoomed in, every microphone tip tilted forward. She opened her mouth, voice steady, and said, "Earlier today, a recording surfaced featuring private remarks by Elon Musk regarding efforts to influence Supreme Court justices in an upcoming ruling. I am releasing this to the public so that we may all decide what we stand for as Americans. Our democracy depends on a fair and impartial judiciary, and no billionaire, no matter how powerful, should have the capacity to alter the course of justice behind closed doors." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, flashes strobe-lit her face, and the faint hum of social media notifications surged like a tidal wave. She knew she had lit a fuse. In that instant, she felt a surge of both exhilaration and dread. Exhilaration because she had struck a blow for transparency, and dread because the repercussions would be merciless and unforgiving. She had made herself a target. In the following hours, texts streamed in, allies praising her courage, foes condemning her as a traitor to innovation, late-night committees convening to discuss the fallout, and within the Supreme Court, whispered panic as justices wondered if their chambers had been infiltrated by leaks. Jasmine felt the weight of it all pressing down on her like an iron band. She retreated to a quiet hallway outside her office, her reflection in the polished brass nameplate staring back at her. and wondered if she'd made a mistake. Doubt slithered at her confidence. What if the tape were manipulated? What if her sources had misled her? What if she'd just become the pawn in someone else's game? But then she remembered her oath to legislate, to serve, to protect the Constitution. She tapped her finger against a cold marble column, recalling her childhood in Fort Worth, the lessons her mother taught her about standing up for what's right, even when the world is screaming at you to stay silent. She pictured her young niece looking up at her with wide eyes, believing in her aunt's integrity. No, she told herself, she would not waver. The media frenzy that ensued was instantaneous. CNN, Fox News, MSNB, all vying to break the story. Pundits argued heatedly about the validity of the tape, speculating on who might be behind the leak. Meanwhile, the White House issued a vague statement. We are aware of the allegations. We await further evidence. Congressional Republicans demanded an ethics investigation into Jasmine's motives. Congressional Democrats rallied behind her, framing the scandal as the latest example of corporate greed corrupting American institutions. Elon Musk's representatives initially remained silent, then issued a terse tweet calling the recording fabricated, vowing legal action against anyone who dared to distribute it further. The tweet garnered millions of likes, retweets, and replies, a digital stampede of polarized reactions, some feverishly defending Musk, others fuming at his hubris, many calling for Jasmine to be censured. Unflagging, Jasmine convened a small team of trusted aides in her cramped Capitol office. They pored over the tape, scrutinizing the background noise, isolating every nuance, consulting forensic audio experts. The more they dug, the more they uncovered, faint murmurs suggesting the presence of someone else in the room when Musk spoke, the echo of a heavy door shutting, the distinct cadence of a second voice urging him to clarify his role in the judiciary's affairs. They traced the leak to an anonymous tip from inside the Supreme Court clerk's suite, someone who overheard a conversation between Musk and a prominent associate of one of the justices. The pieces began to form a mosaic of influence peddling, late-night phone calls, backroom deals, images that no one in the public eye was ready to see. As Jasmine's office worked around the clock, she slipped away to a borrowed meeting room deep within the Capitol. There, she traced lines on a giant whiteboard, connecting names. Elon Musk, Freedom Industries Pass, Justice Prescott, Senator Larkin, Midtown Donor Circle. Each scribble represented one more link in the chain that threatened to unravel the integrity of the Supreme Court. She paused, rubbed her temples, then jotted down 2 words in bold. Impeachment inquiry? At home in the evening, Jasmine walked through the threshold of her humble row house in the leafy D.C. neighborhood near Anacostia. The smell of her brother's spicy gumbo welcomed her, the sound of her niece's laughter dancing through the living room. For a sliver of time, she let herself be someone else. A sister, an aunt, a woman who savored her family's embraces. But as soon as she sank onto her couch, the weight of the day returned. Her phone trembled in her hand, the screen blinking with unanswered calls. Her chief of staff urging her to hold a press availability tomorrow. Her legal team consolidating evidence. An unknown number leaving a voicemail. You should back off, Congresswoman, before you ruin everything. Jasmine closed her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back, but her conscience would not let her. She pictured the scores of people across America who had no platform. Those who'd been trampled by systems of power, the voiceless hoping for a champion. She owed it to them to see this through. That night, she drafted a letter to the Chief Justice John Roberts himself. She laid out the allegations, attached transcripts of every shred of evidence, and requested an emergency meeting. She spent an hour rewriting and erasing, ensuring that every phrase struck the perfect balance between urgency and respect for the court's sanctity. At 3 a.m., bleary-eyed but resolute, she hit send. Within minutes, her phone buzzed, an auto reply from the Chief Justice's office. Your correspondence has been received and is under review. Nothing more. Her stomach clenched, but she refused to feel defeated. She closed her laptop, leaned back, and let exhaustion finally wash over her, her thoughts drifting to the morning sunlight that would soon refill her world. 2 days later, Jasmine strode into the Supreme Court building, escorted by a phalanx of clerks who bowed as she passed. The marbled steps felt colder than she remembered. The hush inside the great chamber felt heavier. Chief Justice Roberts, flanked by several associate justices, awaited her. His expression was unreadable, an inscrutable mask that she'd come to recognize from televised hearings. He was wearing a tailored black robe, his silver hair perfectly combed, but his eyes, those soft, tired eyes, held the gravity of a man who carried the burdens of an institution centuries in the making. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his voice measured. "We have received your letter. Please share any further evidence you have gathered." He motioned to a small mahogany table where a clerk placed a stack of documents and a tablet containing the audio file. Jasmine took a steadying breath. She placed the tablet on the table and tapped to play the clip. An awkward silence filled the chamber as Musk's voice echoed off the walls. She watched as the justices exchanged glances, some of surprise, others calculating, none betraying their inner thoughts. When the tape ended, she stepped forward. "Your Honors, this confirms that Mr. Musk was involved in discussions to influence a future Supreme Court ruling. The questions we must consider are clear. Who else was in this conversation? How deep does this reach? And if there has been any compromise of justice, how do we restore the integrity of our highest court?" Within minutes, Roberts returned her gaze. "We will appoint a special counsel to investigate. Your cooperation will be necessary, and your evidence will be thoroughly vetted." To Jasmine, those words sounded like the tolling of a bell. Her announcement had officially upended the system. She nodded, gratitude and dread mingling in her chest, as she realized the path ahead would be fraught with peril. Walking out of the Supreme Court, she felt the eyes of the nation upon her. Reporters lined the steps like hungry jackals, cameras clicking, microphones thrust upward. One shouted, "Congresswoman, do you think the Supreme Court is compromised?" Another asked, "Is Elon Musk a co-conspirator in corruption?" Jasmine held her composure. She raised a hand, commanded their attention, and spoke. "Right now, every American should ask one question. Can we trust our institutions? Tonight, I will keep working until we have the answers. Thank you." The next morning, Congress erupted into chaos. On the floor of the House, Representative Greg Larkin, Musk's political ally, rose to accuse Jasmine of political theater, demanding she retract her statements pending verification. From the Speaker's chair, Nancy Pelosi urged calm. "We will not jump to conclusions, but we will follow the facts wherever they lead." Jasmine sat at her desk, reviewing a printout of the audio transcript, her mind racing through every possible defense Musk might mount, every procedural hurdle they would face. She leaned back, eyes closing as the hum of the chamber washed over her. She knew she had to keep to a framework of evidence-based argumentation. Emotion could not rule the day, despite the public outrage urging her to push faster. That afternoon, she left for a scheduled visit to a courthouse in Tyler, Texas, where she was set to speak at a symposium on judicial ethics. She boarded a small charter plane, the roar of the engines vibrating through the cabin. She sat beside her aide Marisol, who handed her a file of potential witnesses prepared to testify in the investigation. "If this goes to committee," Marisol said quietly, "we'll need every piece of corroboration. Look at these depositions. Do they align with the tape?" Jasmine scanned the pages. They painted a tapestry of late-night meetings held at Musk's private residence, where wealthy donors and influential activists mingled with lobbyists. Several staffers from Musk's companies testified to overhearing hushed conversations about influencing key outcomes. The name Justice Prescott surfaced repeatedly, a senior justice with decades on the bench, known for his conservative rulings. Rumors suggested that Musk had feared a landmark decision going against his commercial interests, and had secured private promises from Prescott's confidants to sway the justice's vote. The narrative was dizzying. The richest man in the world, manipulating the highest court to secure his vision of the future. When Jasmine's plane landed in Tyler, the sun was already a blazing orb blurring the horizon. The air smelled of mesquite and gasoline. She stepped onto the tarmac, letting the heat soak through her tailored suit. How could she explain the gravity of what she was about to reveal to this crowd without sounding like a conspiracy theorist? She had to trust her preparation, the lawyers, and the forensics. She had to trust herself. At the symposium, a modest crowd of judges, lawyers, and students filled the benches. Jasmine took the stage beneath an arch of classical columns. She began with a rhetorical question. What is the cost of a judicial decision? When that decision safeguards the principles we hold dear, we call it justice. When a decision protects the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, we call it corruption. Which path will our Supreme Court choose? She paused. The audience leaned forward. She outlined the core of the evidence, the tape, the depositions, the paper trail linking Musk's PAC to influential interests. She described in hushed tones how those late-night calls had paved the way for covert promises. No one interrupted. She let the silence swell, then continued. I do not stand here spewing rumors. I stand here with the hard proof that someone powerful believed they could bend justice to their will. And if we do nothing, we are complicit. She closed by urging the legal community to demand transparency, to support the special counsel's work. As she stepped off the dais, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was a local judge, eyes rimmed with concern. You're doing the right thing, he said. Be prepared. This will get nasty. She nodded, gratitude edged with doubt flickering in her mind. How far would they go to protect Musk's empire? How many allies would stand with him? Back in D.C., the investigation intensified. The special counsel, a decorated former U.S. attorney, convened grand juries, sub-penned documents, and issued sealed orders. Jasmine's team worked tirelessly, coordinating with clerks from the Supreme Court, tracking financial transfers across shell corporations. They discovered payments funneled through obscure nonprofit accounts, ultimately tracing back to Musk's personal trust. Late night after late night, Jasmine sat in her office, reassembling the mosaic, refusing to rest. Her reflection in the window revealed dark circles beneath her eyes, but a fierce determination burned brighter than any fatigue. Then came the day when Elon Musk surfaced at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Cameras lined the balcony, senators gripped their pens like bayonets. The question on everyone's mind, would he deny the tape, or would he have no choice but to admit to the exploitation of power? Jasmine watched from the gallery, heart pounding so loudly she thought it might echo in the chamber. When Musk took the stand, he looked composed, almost serene, almost as if he'd rehearsed every move. He gazed across the aisle at Senator Diane Richards, a known Musk ally, and smiled a curt nod. The transcript, kept under lock and key, read like a confession once read aloud. Yes, I did provide funding aimed at shaping the court's decision. I did so because I believed my interests were at risk. I do not regret it. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A senator clutched his notes. A clerk dropped her pen. Journalists leaned forward, eyes wide. Musk continued, his tone measured. But I want to be clear, no one forced me. I acted out of necessity for my companies. The recording you've heard is an excerpt taken out of context. It doesn't show the full conversation where assurances were never explicitly made. I have faith in the justice's integrity. Jasmine felt bile rise in her throat. He was manipulating reality even in his confession, muddying the waters, casting doubt. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She would have her turn to question him, but that moment left her trembling. His control over the narrative was still formidable. That night, Jasmine convened a strategy session in a windowless conference room, lit by a single fluorescent bulb. She and her legal team dissected every word Musk had uttered. He said, out of context, her chief counsel pointed out. This is classic gaslighting. Admit the act, but deny its significance. Another advisor added, we need to show the jury, national jury, how the entire conversation unfolded, how those assurances were implicit, how the justices' votes shifted immediately afterward. Jasmine frowned. The national jury wasn't a formal body. It was the American people whose trust she needed. If she could translate the lawyer speak into plain terms, into a story that people could grasp, maybe the momentum would remain on her side. She spent the next 2 days drafting an op-ed for the Washington Post. She described scene by scene how power can corrupt even the loftiest chambers. She painted a picture of Musk pacing in his Palo Alto study, phone in hand, agitated at the thought of a court ruling that could derail his plans to privatize Mars missions. She imagined the dimly lit corridors of the Supreme Court, a justice torn between duty and private pressure, haunted by late-night phone calls that promised both political capital and corporate funding. She wrote in human terms, anchoring her narrative in the concrete. When the highest court wavers, it is the people who pay the price. Small business owners, single parents, veterans. Their lives hang in the balance of decisions too easily swayed by dollars in the dark. That piece went live with her byline. It spread like wildfire. Social media erupted anew, memed by 10,000 keyboard warriors declaring, "Our courts are for sale." Poll numbers toward her favor spiked, and a national grassroots movement rallied behind the hashtag number Justice Not For Sale. But the pushback was equally fierce. Musk's PR team crafted a counter-narrative, painting him as a misunderstood innovator, a visionary who, like all great leaders, had to make tough decisions. They pointed to his charitable giving, his electric cars, his satellite internet devoted to underserved communities. Slowly, the debate fractured into ideological camps, those who saw Jasmine as a crusader for truth, and those who viewed her as a jealous politician attacking a self-made titan. Pundits scratched their beards asking, can we trust institutions anymore? Civics teachers found themselves explaining republics to befuddled students. The country teetered on the edge of trust and cynicism. Undeterred, Jasmine turned her focus back to Congress. She penned a bill that would increase transparency in campaign contributions and financial ties to judicial nominees. It would require real-time public disclosures of PAC activities, force thorough vetting of potential conflicts for every justice, and establish a permanent oversight committee for judicial ethics. Some colleagues praised her ambition, others grumbled about government overreach. She steeled herself for another round of political warfare. As she prepared to introduce the legislation, she felt like a general arming herself for battle. On the House floor, the debate was fierce. Representative Larkin called her bill a witch hunt, accusing her of undermining the separation of powers. Representative Simone Delgado, a freshman from California, praised her bravery, declaring, "If we don't protect our courts, we lose our republic." Jasmine observed every word, every gesture. She rose when her turn came, voice unwavering as she delivered a speech that cut through the partisan din. This legislation is not about politics. It is about preservation. When we stand by and watch the highest court bend to the will of the wealthy, we abdicate our responsibility to uphold equality under the law. I have seen the tape. I have spoken to those within the court's chambers. I will not stand idly by while we sacrifice the rule of law at the altar of private interest. As her words echoed, she recognized that this moment would define her legacy. Her choices, her resolve, her willingness to risk everything for principle. But the fight was far from over. Overnight, a new leak surfaced from Musk's inner circle, a private email allegedly written by Jasmine's campaign manager, claiming that Jasmine was in secret discussions with venture capitalists who stood to benefit from stricter regulations on tech companies. The timing was suspect. Jasmine convened a meeting with her communications director, Lauren, who grimaced at the email's salacious tone. "It's fabricated," Lauren said with certainty. "Look at the header. It's from an untraceable server in Eastern Europe. They're trying to distract us." Jasmine's jaw clenched. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about the message. They want the public to think I'm a hypocrite." She decided on a preemptive strike, a live interview on C-SPAN where she would lay out her finances publicly, demand an official forensics analysis of the email, and indict Musk's camp for dirty tactics. That evening, as cameras rolled, Jasmine disclosed her personal and campaign finances down to the penny. She pointed out that every contribution was from verified American citizens, that none had ties to controversial PACs. She denounced the email as a smear job orchestrated to silence scrutiny of corporate influence. Late-night ratings soared. Viewers watched, riveted, as she dismantled the falsified narrative in real time. But reactions splintered. Some cheered her authenticity, others murmured, "She's just covering her tracks." The fray boiled over on social media. Hashtags #Crockett exposed and Musk guilty trended simultaneously. In the eye of this storm, Jasmine found respite in small moments. One afternoon, she slipped away to the Capitol's rooftop garden, where the scent of blooming jasmine, no relation to her name, mingled with the distant hum of traffic. She leaned against the wrought iron railing, closed her eyes, and let the breeze wash over her. In her mind's eye, she replayed scenes from her childhood, sneaking into the backyard, catching fireflies in mason jars with her brother, her mother's soft lullabies at night, the first time she realized that words held power. She felt her chest tighten. She was tired of the endless scrutiny, of the whispers, of the sense that any step she took might be the wrong one. Yet she also felt unwavering resolve. If she gave up now, all that would remain was silence. Silence that allowed the powerful to do as they pleased. She refused to let that be her story. The special counsel's investigation concluded that Elon Musk did indeed engage in actions that could be construed as undue influence. But there was not enough to prosecute for criminal conspiracy. Instead, they recommended hefty fines for undisclosed payee contributions and mandated corrective measures in how companies could engage with the judiciary. Musk, facing public backlash and financial penalties, posted an apology on his Tesla website. "I overstepped. I regret any harm caused to public trust. I remain committed to innovation and to supporting America's democratic ideals." Jasmine read the statement on her phone and felt a complex swirl of vindication and unease. He hadn't been criminally charged, but the damage was done. A stain lingered on the institution and on her conscience. Could the system ever truly be clean? As Washington settled into an uneasy calm, Jasmine turned her attention to the long term. She worked tirelessly to pass her reform bill. In committee after committee, she faced hostile questioning, midnight negotiation sessions, and personal attacks. But slowly, like a glacier inching its way down a mountain, momentum grew. Bipartisan senators, recognizing the public's anger at corporate influence, threw their support behind the legislation. Journalists praised her tenacity. In neighborhoods from Detroit to Phoenix, community organizers held forums on judicial reform, invoking Jasmine's name as a beacon. She traveled to Middle America town hall after town hall, listening to people who felt unheard. She listened to veterans who had seen justice denied, teachers who faced lawsuits without hope of fair trial, families who lost everything to corporate bankruptcies. Every story reaffirmed her purpose. And then, on a brisk November evening, the bill passed. The House vote read 279 in favor, 158 against. As the gavel struck, applause erupted in the chamber. Jasmine watched tears well in her eyes, tears for every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment she'd questioned whether pushing this far was worth it. She rose, her colleagues surrounding her, clapping, cheering, even some who had once called her naive now smiling in respect. She raised her hand, eyes scanning the room, and mouthed a simple, "Thank you." But her journey didn't end there. A few weeks later, she stood in front of a packed auditorium at Howard University, invited to speak on leadership in the 21st century. She recounted the saga, the late-night whistleblower call, the moment she knew she had to act, the Supreme Court meeting, the Senate grilling, the smear campaigns, the ultimate triumph of her legislation. Her voice rose and fell, each pause weighted with recollection. I learned that power, real power, doesn't come from titles or money. It comes from knowing your truth and having the courage to speak it, even when the world tells you to shut up. The audience rose to their feet. Standing ovation thundered through the hall. Among them sat young students clutching notebooks, eyes shining. Jasmine felt a swell of hope. The next generation would carry this flame. Late into the night, she signed copies of books, memoirs by civil rights leaders, textbooks on constitutional law, for students lined up with hopeful faces. She paused at one young woman's sign, scrawled with bold letters, "Be like Crockett." The girl's eyes brimmed with admiration. Jasmine knelt, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "Be yourself." That's all you need. Back in Washington, as the holiday lights twinkled around the National Mall, Jasmine reflected on the year's whirlwind. She sat in her modest apartment, the tree's ornaments reflecting in the window, mapping constellations of her journey. She dialed her niece on video chat. The girl's bright face appeared on screen, a smile stretching from ear to ear. "Auntie Jazz!" she shrieked. "You got more awards?" Jasmine laughed. "Just one for now. Congressional leadership in integrity." "Cool," the niece exclaimed. "Can I come visit?" "Of course," Jasmine said, her heart swelling. "I'll see you soon." After they hung up, Jasmine lingered by the tree, her thoughts drifting to Elon Musk. His apology had been perfunctory, penance for a visible wound. But the real victory lay in the reminder that democracy belonged to the people. She thought of the countless Americans who had found their voice in this battle. Teachers, mechanics, nurses, retirees, who shared their stories, who demanded fairness. Her role was not just to legislate, but to amplify those voices, to ensure that no one could ever so cavalierly whisper away a citizen's rights. Early the next morning, Jasmine rose before sunrise. She trekked to the Capitol along quiet streets, the chill of December crisp against her face. Inside the chamber, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the floor in kaleidoscopes of color. She took her seat, the weight of history tangible around her. As she sipped her coffee, she realized she wasn't done. There were further reforms to pursue in campaign finance, in transparency, and voting rights. The momentum she had unleashed could not be contained. She felt invigorated. In the months that followed, Jasmine led a bipartisan task force on judicial appointments, ensuring that every nominee disclosed financial entanglements, frankly, that each underwent rigorous scrutiny for conflicts of interest. She championed legislation to increase federal aid for underfunded state courts, ensuring that families of modest means had access to legal counsel. She held fly-in visits to rural counties in Texas, speaking to judges who juggled heavy caseloads with meager resources, promising to push for increased funding. Her reputation as a reformer grew. She was invited to headline conferences on democracy around the globe, Germany, Canada, Japan, where audiences marveled at an American congresswoman who had stared down a tech titan and emerged victorious. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's empire was reeling. Tesla's stocks nosedived for a moment, then rebounded as investors shrugged and refocused on electric car sales. SpaceX faced delays as NASA scrutinized its contracts. Musk himself retreated from the public eye, focused on Musk-branded retreats where he spoke only to loyal insiders. The scandal haunted him. Anyone who had once worshipped at his altar now eyed him with suspicion, but he pressed on, refining rockets and autopilots unwilling to cede an inch of ground. Yet Jasmine knew something would have changed indelibly in his mind. He had glimpsed the power of public accountability, and though he might never admit it openly, he understood that in America, even the richest man could be checked. Spring arrived, and with it, a new wave of controversy. A Supreme Court ruling on reproductive rights loomed, one that would shape not only American law but the social fabric for generations. Jasmine sensed history repeating itself, a moment when big money could again tilt the scales, this time in a matter far more intimate than tech venture funding. She dug in, mobilized her caucus, coordinated amicus briefs from civil rights organizations, and prepared to stand firm. The hearings were a prelude to fireworks, lobbyists swirling outside the Capitol like gnats, both sides claiming moral high ground, protests erupting in front of the justices' gates. Jasmine felt each media surge as a tidal wave crashing against her resolve. In the courtroom's gallery, she watched as advocates from every walk of life testified. Mothers who feared losing autonomy over their bodies, doctors who would be forced to choose between medical ethics and legal risks, activists who saw a broader war on individual liberty. She remembered the tape of Elon Musk's confession, how it had revealed the underside of influence. She recognized that this new battle was connected. The same forces that tried to twist justice with dollars now aimed to control personal rights with political maneuvering. She stood, drifted to the back of the gallery so as not to distract the justices, closed her eyes and whispered under her breath, "Let justice be blind, not biased by power." When the ruling came down, it was a narrow decision that upheld the precedent, but included provisions that threatened to undercut access in certain states. The country erupted in celebration and outrage in equal measure. Jasmine watched speeches on the floor of the House, read tweets from constituents, listened to tears of joy and cries of anger. She felt every emotion coursing through the national bloodstream. Late that night, she met with a coalition of young activists in a church basement near Howard. They huddled in a circle, brainstormed strategies to strengthen protections at the state level, and plotted grassroots campaigns. Jasmine marveled at their passion, at their refusal to accept incremental victories as the endpoint. She saw herself reflected in their fire and, for a moment, felt the weight of generations on her shoulders. Those who had fought for labor rights, civil rights, women's rights, now passing the torch. She understood that her role had evolved. She was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a mentor, a guide, a beacon. But every hero's journey carries a moment of reckoning. A lone figure from Jasmine's past emerged, an old mentor who had co-authored early bills with her, now head of a powerful lobbying firm. He approached her one evening in a secluded hallway, his smile polite, eyes calculating. He began, "We've known each other a long time. I admire your fire, but sometimes you forget that progress is made in increments, not leaps. You're isolating allies who could help you." He gestured to the corridor. "I have a client who could make amends for your staff's recent funding shortfall. We can talk privately." Jasmine felt the familiar pang of moral injury, an offer to buy her goodwill, to trade principles for convenience. Her pulse quickened, fury rising. She remembered every lesson, every time she had refused such deals. She squared her shoulders, leveled her gaze. "I'm not interested," she said, voice low but unwavering. "My constituents deserve my loyalty, not your negotiations. If you want to chat, it's on the record." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing in the flickering fluorescent light. She knew that moment would become another test. Would she remain resolute, or would political reality eventually dim her fire? She stayed her course. Over the summer, Jasmine held hearings on federal funding of public schools, battled to protect voting rights, and stood firm against trailing compromise. Her communications team coined a phrase that stuck: "Integrity is non-negotiable." When she delivered speeches, crowds chanted, "Integrity is non-negotiable." She felt a sense of purpose, but also felt the exhaustion creeping in. Late-night strategy sessions, endless interviews, the constant pressure to stay 2 steps ahead of opponents. She missed her family dinners, her Sunday dinners at her mother's house back in Fort Worth. She missed the smell of her brother's gumbo cooking in the evening. She missed feeling grounded. One summer evening, she flew home to Fort Worth for her grandmother's funeral. The flight was delayed. Too many storms piled over the Midwest. She sat in the airport terminal at night, elevator lights flickering, janitorial staff mopping floors. She watched a young couple arguing quietly over a boarding pass mix-up. The hush of the terminal enveloped her. She thought, everyone here has a story that is often overshadowed by bigger headlines. She pulled out a notebook, scribbled down ideas for a foundation she wanted to start, one to give grants to community activists working to empower local leaders. She realized that even as she fought big battles in D.C., true change rippled from the local level. The next morning in Fort Worth, she stood in her grandmother's modest living room, surrounded by cousins, aunts, uncles. They laughed through tears as they shared memories of a woman who had taught them to be fierce yet kind. Jasmine spoke from the heart. Grandma never cared about titles. She cared about people. She believed that every voice mattered, even the quietest ones. If you want to honor her, then look around you. Find someone who needs to be heard. Stand up for them. As she spoke, she felt a deep peace, a reminder of her roots, of why she'd embarked on this fight in the first place. Back in D.C. the following Monday, Jasmine hit the ground running. She launched the Crockett Foundation, a nonprofit offering microgrants to young activists. She held a press conference announcing seed funding, celebrating her grandmother's legacy. She felt renewed, as if breathing fresh air into her lungs, and she knew her fight for reform would never be just about courts or tech or billionaires. It would always be about people, like her niece, like that young couple at the airport, like the teachers reshaping young minds in public schools. It would always be about giving voice to those who needed it most. As the year turned, Jasmine's rise became emblematic of a new era in American politics, one where morality and grit mattered more than poll-tested slogans, where a single Congresswoman could expose a powerful billionaire's secrets and still stand tall. She continued to pursue legislation, environmental regulations to curb corporate pollution, affordable housing initiatives to stem the tide of homelessness in D.C., and comprehensive healthcare reform that included mental health parity. Each new bill carried echoes of that first fight against Musk's hidden influence. She insisted on transparency, on accountability, on fairness. She demanded that every committee she served on operate with the same principles she championed. Winter arrived again, and Jasmine found herself walking along the National Mall at dawn, snow dusting the walkways, squirrels scampering under leafless trees. She paused by the Washington Monument, hands in pockets, breath visible in the frigid air. The city was still asleep. The only sound was her boots crunching the thin layer of snow. She thought back to the instant she first heard that tape, a moment of choice that had set her on this path. She had chosen courage, chosen to expose the truth. Today, she would choose again, to keep fighting, no matter the cost. She didn't know what the future would hold. Perhaps new scandals, new powerful adversaries, new tests of her resolve. But she knew one thing with unwavering certainty. She would never back down. The sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the mall. Jasmine took a step forward, determination etched in every line of her face. Behind her, the monument stood sentinel, silent witnesses to the ideals she fought for. She knew that democracy was not a one-time victory, but a constant endeavor, requiring vigilance, sacrifice, and unshakable faith in the possibility of a more just world. As she turned toward the Capitol dome, she felt a quiet contentment settle in her heart. She had seen what happened when the powerful believed they could act without consequence. She had shown that one voice, armed with truth, could shift the balance of power. And she had done it not for fame or fortune, but because she believed in something greater than herself. The promise that every person, regardless of status or wealth, deserved a chance to be heard. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked through the rotunda, the echoes of her footsteps reminding her that every step forward left an imprint. She would continue to press on, to challenge, to reveal. She would dig deeper into the hidden deals that threatened the republic. She would champion those who had no voice, and she would never forget that, in the end, power belongs to the people, not the powerful. The story of Elon Musk's shocking confession had become more than a scandal. It had become a testament to the power of integrity. It had ignited a movement, reshaped institutions, and reminded the nation that democracy lives when we hold the mighty accountable. And through it all, at every turning point, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood as the hero, unyielding, resolute, reminding us that no matter how deep corruption may burrow, light can still break through. If you want more jaw-dropping political dramas starring Jasmine Crockett, hit subscribe now.